we aren't separate people in work and home. We may act differently, but turns out we're actually the same person. So you kind of have to create space in an organization where it's okay to tell your personal story. We're not talking about anything, politically charged or anything. We're just talking about me as a person. What am I about?
Chad Peterman here, and you are listening to Can't Stop the Growth, a platform for leaders and teams to grow and thrive. We highlight the importance of personal development, pursuing greatness, and always chasing your potential. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to another episode of Can't Stop the Growth. I'm your host, Chad Peterman, and today I have a very special guest. I say very special. I was recently just introduced to him. I just met him for the first time here just a few moments ago. But in doing a little bit of research into what he is doing and more importantly, how he is doing it, I think we've got a lot to talk about. So I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about what he's doing, and then we'll connect it back to the whole purpose of this podcast. How do we grow not only our companies, but how do we grow our people? How do we find purpose in the organizations that we build? And how collectively does that make a better place? And so without any further ado, would like to welcome Marshall Lockton to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Marshall.
Thank you, Chad. And it's great to be on. And like you said, we share a lot of common views about the importance of culture.
Absolutely. So I did this big lead up, this big intriguing lead up. Why don't we start by you maybe giving a little bit of your background, kind of what you've done, what you're doing now, and then we'll jump into what we both know, but the listeners don't yet know.
Well, maybe I'll work my way backwards. So currently I'm the chair and owner of Night Agency. Night Agency it was a business that I was fortunate enough to find and acquire the majority of, along with my partner, Mike, who was the founder of the agency. We're a marketing firm, but we specialize in HR communications and employer brand. What we're really trying to do is help with employee engagement. And we do that through building connections. So connection to the company, connection to the work, connection to the leader, and connection to one another. It ends up taking a lot of different forms. We end up looking like a marketing agency if you were to kind of go from the outside, but generally, we're working to do that work in an internal communications channel. That's currently what I'm doing. I'm helping, obviously run the business with strategy and developing new clients. We're also hosting a podcast for family business owners as part of that. And that came about because of sort of my personal journey to figure out what, my purpose was. And I was fortunate enough to work in a family business. So my uncle, Jack, started Lockton, which is insurance brokerage and employee benefits consultant. He started it nearly 60 years ago. And, he used to always talk about the importance of people. It's basically all we had in a people business was the people that chose to work with us, and they would flourish in the right culture and if they were empowered. And so that's continued on for 60 years as a business that's people first, driven by local teams, local accountability and ownership, and letting people be empowered to reach their full potential is the purpose statement. So through, self-discovery, there was a path at the family business that was a great job. There's great people, great relationships, people that I love working with and love working with family members. But, the path to sort of a fulfilled life, a life that I felt like I was reaching my full potential, wasn't there. So stepped back, did self-discovery, thought about the fact that growing up, I loved marketing businesses and started my career doing that. And that was kind of the innate passion that I had. And that I also loved from Lockton, what a great culture looked like. And so I was out looking for businesses that basically were professional services businesses, specifically marketing. And I would talk about part of that as I wanted to find a company that had a unique customer employee experience and make an investment in that company and help grow it to the next level. And you put together a business plan and turn that into a website. And then when you're acquiring businesses, you're basically having a lot of conversations like a sales job. So I was out having a lot of coffees, doing a lot of outreach to business brokers and investment banks and direct outreach, and ultimately got lucky that my purpose was aligned with this company that I discovered out of Orlando, which is Night Agency. And we made a decision that Mike and I saw the world in the same way. We saw the opportunity. That's sort of my background in growing professional services businesses and our shared interest in culture and how that drives performance. And, we've been business partners along with our company for the last year and a quarter now.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to dive into. I think that for me, and I say this a lot, so I'm curious to get your take on it, is, people first organizations, empowerment, building trust, different stuff like that. It's one thing to say it, it's another to do it. Obviously, you had a lot of experience in your family business and then, obviously carrying that forward to today. What does that look like? Give me some hey, this is what is meant by people first within a company. Because I think a lot of people get stuck on that. They're like, well, what does that even mean? What is that? I love my people, I'm for them, but words are one thing, actions are another. What have you seen that look like over your career?
I think that Lockton has historically been a place where people could do their best work in their profession. In our case, is insurance and employee benefits. And what that looks like for them is, we've created a place where small teams of people are empowered to do the right thing for the client, and the corporate managers can't or don't come in and overrule how to do things in a way that best serve the client. So, that ends up looking like a company with less bureaucracy, where the front line or the individual has some authority because they're the ones that, in our case, know the clients best. There's a whole long conversation probably to have about, how do you structure that and how do you preserve culture, and it has a lot to do with finding the right leaders of people to kind of continue to install that and then continuing to communicate it and reinforce it. But when I really think of what's it really mean to be a people first business, how I, personally think about it is that the employee or the team actually comes first, before the client. And the reason I say that, and I'm not by any means the only person to have ever said that. I think you talk about that a lot, but the reason I think that it's important is that if the individual feels like this is the place where they can flourish, where they're supported, where they're seen, heard, and adding value, they're going to put their best effort forward and to continue to be great. It's like going to a hotel. You can go to one hotel that, they're just getting by and checking you in and don't make you feel a certain way. And then you can go to across the street and, everybody's happy to make customer service a priority. And I think that has a lot to do with putting the individual first, not putting the person walking into the hotel first, but actually putting the individual behind the desk first and making it a place where they want to work and a culture they want to work in.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things, and I asked this question because I was asked it today, and would love to get your take on it. So, when we start companies, they're small, right? And you can touch all the people. And so your mission and vision of, in your case, the people first, and I'm sure in a lot of companies, that's kind of the overarching thing. We want to build a place where people can flourish, they can do their best work, they can do all of the things that they want to do in their career. However, as we grow, we have to put managers in place. And I always call it a giant game of telephone. This is what we want, but then the manager has to actually do that with the individual contributors that they are managing. How have you seen, whether it be at Lockton, whether it be now and what you're trying to do with Night, how have you been able to make sure that message, that mission statement that is so powerful and kind of the guiding light, how does it make its way through management? Whether that be training of managers, whether that be, what have you done? What are the things that people can take away and say, oh, okay, well, this will help kind of facilitate what I want the managers to do?
Yeah. Well, I think it does come back to your original point that, the managers have to be empowered as well. But there's there is a balance, right? That, like you said, there's a culture statement potentially that has been created that you want the managers to be able to convey. So in pass forward, so it's not just, leadership saying one thing, but at the employee level, it's a different thing. So tactically, I guess we do a few different things at, the night agency. They mainly are geared around personalization. So if you have a purpose in a business, which, purpose can be to do something of benefit to the rest of the world, but it ultimately is, your essence and why you exist. But assuming that you've written a purpose, we like to turn that into more of a story or a narrative. So sort of a longer form, not super long, but a page narrative that tells the story of the company and paints a vision. So from there, we take that story and purpose statement and values, and we turn them into individualization exercises. And so it's one thing if the company believes this, but do I believe it? And how does my work and my personal life tie to the purpose and the values of the company? And so, that can be, a digital course where you go through the purpose and the values and spend, multiple weeks personalizing them to yourself and sort of contemplating how you match up with them. Or it could be a simple, it could be a meeting where the CEO invites everybody into the purpose and they're individualizing it and thinking about what it means to them. So that's kind of step one. And then step two would be, like you said, tools for the managers. And so we'll build leader guides, which, helps them understand the story that we talked about, helps them understand how to tell the story in their own way, and then give some like tactical things about, how would you run a meeting that would be a people first meeting to be able to talk about culture and things that might be out of their comfort zone. So that's some tactical things. I think there's also operational integration things. How do you build it into the systems of the company, from HR systems to how you run the business? But the takeaways would be, activation, this kind of communication of the purpose through story, personalization, individualizing it to each person, and then integration would be, how do you teach the managers? How do you build it into your people systems of your business?
Yeah, I really like that, kind of making it their personal story. One of my goals this year is that by the end of the year, I can walk up to any individual in the organization and they can give me our 5 values. That's what I want. So I'm really curious. Tell me more about this whole, I guess it would be exercise that you do with maybe managers, where you kind of allow the purpose to become their own. What does that look like? Because I find that very interesting, and I think that that's something that listeners could take away as like, oh shoot, well, I could do that. That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. I mean, you can always hire us and we can help you, but I think the simple version would be, that, well, it's an example would be building better lives. It's a real estate development company, fairly straightforward purpose, building better lives, but, within your job, what does building better lives mean? And so, if you are in the front desk, building better lives means this in my role. If you're behind the scenes and you're in the accounting department, how do I contribute to building better lives? And then I think the other piece that you talked about was, values. So we've done things where we call it a values journey, but you go through the values journey and, what's one of your 5 values?
Lead ourselves.
So lead ourselves. And so there might be some time and reflection that every person goes through on lead ourselves. And they say, okay, what does that mean to me? How am I doing? How am I expressing it in my work life? How am I expressing it in my individual life? And so, values are just values on a wall if the individuals don't actually, internalize them and personalize them. And so one way to do it is self-reflection. And another way to do it is, like you talked about, like through the efforts and conversations of the management team with everyone.
I like that. Yeah, and I think that's such an important point. I think, for the longest time, we didn't have any stated values, right? We were a small company, scrappy. We just do the things. And we went through an exercise, I think it was back kind of during COVID, so call it 2019, 2020, where we were trying to uncover, what are the values of this company? And, we settled on the 5 values, but I think to your point, it's very easy to get away from those, right? It's not that you're operating any differently, but like that you bring on new people, you may mention them, they may be on the wall, but, how do we make them come to life? How do we make them kind of guide our every decision, which I think is really, really powerful.
Yeah, I think you build them into selection or even before selection, recruiting the right people and then selection and then how you manage performance throughout the person's career. And then when you have to make a decision, somebody's not a fit, that you can look back at the values. And so I don't know if you guys use entrepreneurial operating system, but we do, and define our Knight's own values through that process, which, we do it all the time for clients, but it's like, what are our own values? And I think we're still in the process of how do you fully integrate them into the, every aspect of the operations of the business. I will say though that Knight recommends clients also think about behaviors that are sort of associated with the values, because the values can sometimes be, more big picture, aspirational, and the behaviors can be observable and measured and put into a performance review. And so that's kind of the next layer down, is doing a session with the leadership team on what the values are, but then say, okay, specifically, what are the behaviors that we want to see? And so some of our guides will include, values. What's that mean to me? What's that mean to the business? How does that show up, through behaviors? And what's the business benefit?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. We had these cards made, and so it would have the value on it, and then like on the back of it, you would flip it over and it would say behaviors, and it would give you ones that were in line with that value and then ones that weren't in line. So it was very like, because I think sometimes values, it's like, well, what does that mean? Or that means something different to everybody. But I feel like most people can align on, yeah, that behavior is in line and can maybe relate to that particular behavior as something that, okay, I can relate to that value a little bit better.
Yeah. And then I think along with that, the other thing that, we do and a lot of companies do is do recognition around those values. So whether that's, a digital town hall and you give people props for, living to the value, or whether it's a, annual meeting and you give an award away around it, but not just giving away the award, but describing why it fit that value and that you want to see more of that in your organization.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And appreciate you sharing that. I think that those are some key takeaways that people can take and kind of supercharge the values, their mission statement, their purpose, whatever it may be, because I think that's only going to drive, the business forward. When you think about, and I guess this is maybe from your experience at Knight Agency, what do you typically see as like some common like downfalls? Like, is it they don't have any values? Is it they, aren't operating by them? Like when you guys go into an organization, what are some of the things maybe people are asking you to solve for, or that you typically see and it's like, hey, you may not even see this, but this is definitely an issue?
Yeah, and I have to caveat that my partners have been doing this business a lot longer than I am. So anyone listening that's like, oh, this guy's saying kind of the surface level stuff, we go a lot deeper. But I think that we're usually trying to define connection. When I say connections, connection between the company, connection to the leader, connection to the work, connection to each other, as having like a business outcome. And I think oftentimes the stumbling block is the CEO leader do they really buy that connection does result in an ROI and a benefit to the company? Because, people have different worldviews. Some people think it's the right thing to do because that's part of business. Other people think the purpose of business is to generate profit. And ultimately, you got to be able to speak to both languages, that there's a performance aspect to this and a results aspect to this. And there's a do the right thing because, we're all human aspect to this. And I think trying to balance both those is an important point that can kind of become a stumbling block or like a reason that someone wouldn't move forward. And then I think the other thing is taking the employer brand and the great writing and storytelling that we can do. If it just becomes writing on the wall, like you said, then it's actually could backfire because people see the value up on the wall and they're like, well, you said that customer service was the most important thing, but you actually rewarded sales above all else or bottom line, whatever you want to say, then those aren't going to be aligned. And so that the work that you did writing the values could actually backfire if it's not what you actually see lived in the organization. So making sure they're real and the leadership lives by them. So the leadership's got to embody them. And then I think last is the aspect of, like we talked about earlier, is just how do you really integrate those into the day-to-day so that you don't become the organization that just has them on the walls, but it's not ever referred to again. It's just turns into one of those old, you go walk in an office building and there's a picture of an eagle flying around and says like aspiration, but it gets stale pretty fast if you don't see it in new forms and lived every day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think it's something that as a business, you're always going to be working on. I've said before, culture is a lot about consistency. And are we doing it day in, day out? Are we acting like that? Are we talking about it? Are we rewarding those types of behaviors? All of those things, I think, are key pieces to, the question of how do I build culture? What's that look like? And I think it's so much more than, the typical things we think about when we think about, well, what kind of culture does your place have? I think a lot of it has to do with kind of the actions and the care and compassion that you have for the people around you.
Yeah, look, it has to be real, right? Like you talk about, like, if you don't actually care about people as people and that, they're replaceable because of the bottom line orientation, you're probably not going to do the things that actually build real culture. So I think it's a combination. I think it's really caring, but you also have CEOs that really care that don't really have the roadmap of the tools and structures and things that you need to put in place to sustain them. And I think that's where we come in is, we want to find people-oriented CEOs, also driven by performance, but they may need a roadmap in order to, execute it and put it into place so that kind of continues on, sustains within the organization.
Would you say that this roadmap, is this kind of like, obviously every business has budgets, they've got, kind of their strategic plan. Where do you feel like your plan kind of fits into that whole grand scheme of all these plans? Everybody's got a lot of plans. How do you guys try to position the plan that you guys work to help create in with all of the other plans that businesses have?
It's a great question. I think the best answer I could give you is that, business strategies should tie to people strategies, and underneath people strategies, you need a toolkit in order to operationalize those. And so, a very culture-oriented business like yours, you may have a whole strategy in your strategic plan around something you want to put in place, and obviously we could support that. But I would say more commonly, there's probably some business objectives, and then underneath that, they have to be empowered by people, and then you want to create emotion around them so that there's some, motivation and willingness to do the work that it's going to take to realize your strategic goals.
When you think about the role that, and I ask this question because I'm curious, it's one of our big initiatives is to celebrate more. I feel like, we're in the home services business, so, it's emergency service. People aren't calling us because they want to. They're calling us because they have to. And so you can get wrapped up in, just the day-to-day grind. It's cold out, it's hot out, whatever it may be. How do you encourage clients to kind of intertwine that celebration piece, and how does that kind of tie to, the values and the culture and different things like that?
I think that we talked about recognition, which is super important. So the people are seen and valued, especially when they're exhibiting the values that you want to see in the organization. But a lot of businesses in the day-to-day can be a grind. So if you don't stop for a bit and celebrate, you lose the excitement and the endorphins of why you joined the business in the first place. And so I think, again, it kind of comes to rituals, like what you memorialize, you can replicate. And so there's obviously the great managers, and you hope to find them that just do that naturally and celebrate people naturally. But then there's others that need a little more prodding. And how do you, create those rituals so they just become part of your organization?
I would agree. Like I said, it's a huge focus for us this year because I think we've gotten away from it as we've gotten bigger and we get more spread out. We've got 11 locations now, so you don't see everybody on a daily basis. You don't know how these people are doing. Yeah, you can jump into the dashboard or the software and you can kind of see, but you just don't have that human connection. I guess in your work, what are some of the things, like if your workforce is spread out, let's say they're all remote. I think that's probably the more popular one, but you got multi-locations, you can't see everybody, all of that. What's kind of your recommendation or what do people need to over-index in when that is a constraint on building culture and different things like that? I mean, it's easy when everybody's sitting in the same office, right? It's like, oh yeah, this is great. We're going to have great culture. This is awesome. But when you're trying to create it where everybody is spread out, how do you see that?
I think it's probably the most common question that we get because so many workforces are decentralized. I mean, there's a variety of reasons for it. Night Agency is a small business, but we are remote first, and we do daily stand-ups on video and try to talk to everyone. But that obviously isn't going to work for a bigger business. So Lockton was multi-location across the country and world, and that's a different challenge. And then the other challenge is what you talked about, where the workforce is not sitting in front of a office, in front of a computer. They're in the field, they're doing work. And so we hear all of those different scenarios. I think that's where the storytelling component does come in, is that we've started with a story about the company, and hopefully that has a purpose in it, and that there's a personalization aspect to it. So like telling that story over and over through whatever the channels are. Hopefully you have channels that you can reach people, in an office setting. That might be pretty easy through video and, intranets and different digital tools that exist. But in a setting like yours, it might not be easy. People might be mainly on their phones and in the field. And so we've built some mobile apps that have, exercises that people can do that are kind of short learning exercises that tie to the culture of the company. Like you said, there's obviously leaderboards, and using scorecards that are sort of gamified and make it fun is a popular thing. But, I think it has to come back to the storytelling that, people are people, and understanding each other as real people, not just as professionals. And then whatever medium you can find to do that based on the workforce, geographic distribution. And that's what we try to do is, put that right content in that right channel. And then hopefully you have a CEO who's on board with, and managers that are on board with communicating that often.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you said storytelling, because when I asked the question and you started into it, I'm like, you know what? I think the connection is the storytelling element, where if I'm a technician in a truck all by myself all day long, like, yeah, the values of the company, that's wonderful. However, I'm out here in a crawl space, not great. How does that all connect? And I think that your point about being able to tell a story about the company, but then also individualizing those stories and then linking them back to the company, to me, is a powerful component into kind of uniting decentralized workforces.
Yeah, now you're right in the sweet spot of what we do and how we think about it. You're right. It's like a story. The story is what creates the emotion of the individual. Like there's the old saying about, one person's laying brick, the other person's, building a cathedral to worship God. And, in your case, you could be doing the hard work of HVAC repair, or you could be serving people so they can live together with their family. I'm sure you have a better purpose statement than that, but it connects to something more powerful about the work that they do, and, outcomes based. And so you tell that story in a way that brings in nuance about the company and your history and your legacy. And that story kind of becomes the guide. It's like, I didn't make this up at all, but I heard a recent podcast of a lion tracker in Africa talking about people sitting around the campfires telling stories, and that becomes the story that people tell each other within the group about who they are and how they identify, and that becomes a very powerful communication tool. And I think that's what you have to do is like, we tend to do it through people stories, like individuals telling their own story, what they're about, some challenge they've gone through in their life, how their professional life intersects with that. And then those just become great tools to ladder up to the company purpose and create motivation, create personalization.
Yeah, no, I think that's really powerful. And I was talking earlier today about, busy schedules and everybody running around and, who do I show up as at work versus who do I show up as at home for my friends, family, whoever it may be. And I think it's just this whole concept of storytelling to me is kind of the connector, if you will, of bridging the gap between work and personal, and how do we create kind of that work-life purpose? How do we create a situation where I come to work and I get to be this person and I'm connected to these individuals, but I'm also that person when I'm connected to my family or my kids or my spouse or whatever it may be. I think that's really powerful when you think about it like that. It's like, how do we create at work a place where, as we started, people can flourish, people can chase their dreams, they can grow, they can develop, which then, trickles over into their personal life.
Yeah, we aren't separate people in work and home. We may act differently, but turns out we're actually the same person. So you kind of have to create space in an organization where it's okay to tell your personal story. We're not talking about anything, politically charged or anything. We're just talking about me as a person. What am I about? And let them feel safe telling that story. So we have a really great interviewer who also has a podcast on People Forward Network, Danielle, and she's great at opening people up through their personal journey. And, in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you can really get a great sense of, who someone is, what motivates them, why they love to work here, how that connects to their personal purpose and family life. Seeing that as a valuable use of time, that's kind of the CEO role. It's like, why is it valuable for me to let people be themselves and tell their own story and be the hero of their own story in the workplace?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we had this conversation because I think it's important for people to be reminded of this because as we talked a little bit earlier, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the minutia of the business. But I think uncovering why you are actually doing what you're doing. Yes, I need to earn a living. I need to make money to take care of my family and all of the stuff. But are you just going to work to punch the clock, or are you going to work because you're truly fulfilled? And I think as leaders, we have that obligation. It's a tough obligation. It's maybe not something we signed up for in the beginning, but I think in order to build great companies, we have to tap into that.
Yeah, my guess is your company is successful because you've created that culture where people care about one another and they're able to build their own story, their own journey within the company that translates with what they want from their personal life. I'll give you one more example, from our work is a construction company, very culture oriented, but fairly old school sales approach. So we had this idea of like, if the managers in that case didn't really believe that they could motivate people, or just old school, they hadn't thought about it that way. And so we decided to go actually interview their family members. So interview the children and the spouses and ask them, how does that person show up at home? And it turns out they actually can motivate people and inspire people. And so they revealed it. They all watched it together, like tears of a group of, guys that generally probably wouldn't be crying in the workplace. And, that's what I think we're talking about is like letting people see the connection. They don't have to just check in and check out. They can bring that same person into the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Marshall, I can't thank you enough. I mean, I've got, darn near a whole page of notes here of things that we need to revisit and, just take a look at. Like we said, it's just about, just staying on it, consistency and different things of that nature. Before we jump off here, if people are interested in learning a little bit more about kind of Night Agency, could this help my organization, learn more about what you guys do as it relates to, storytelling, building culture, kind of harnessing your values and how we grow businesses with that, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
I appreciate that. And, happy to help anyone, or if you are interested in learning more about our own podcast, just write me at Marshall with 2 L's at Night Agency, KNIGHT agency.com, or go to our website, www.nightagency.com. And we are happy to have a conversation and give you some thoughts about how to approach some of these challenges, because they are common challenges that I think a lot of businesses face as they scale. And, as you keep culture, as you get bigger, you just got to think about how do you put more tools in place. And so thank you for having me on. I wish we could keep going for a while, because there's lots more to get into.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Marshall. And for those of you out there, again, focus on these things. What we're talking about here are things that can definitely help your business and can definitely build a stronger culture, which is ultimately going to help the people that serve on your team. So thanks again, Marshall. Appreciate you being on. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to get connected, you can find me at chadmpeterman.com. To see what our team's up to, you can visit petermanbros.com. As always, keep growing out there.